Good morning, everyone. My name is Anthony Mills, and this is our July 2022 GI&I webinar. I'm the Executive Director of GI&I, Global Innovation Institute. GI&I is the world's leading professional certification, business accreditation, and membership organization in the field of innovation. And we host webinars like this approximately once a month and host different speakers and different guests who come and present very enlightening topics to us relating to the world of innovation. So thank you for being here with us today. What I'd like to do now is to introduce to you our speaker, our guest today, and talk about what he's doing. So our guest today is Mr. Ludwig Melik. Ludwig is the CEO of Planbox and Idea Connection, the leading agile innovation management platform provider and expert solver network. With more than 20 years experience in innovation portfolio management, Ludwig is an esteemed thought leader and domain expert in full lifecycle innovation portfolio management, emerging tech empowerment, and ecosystem enablement. Throughout his tenure, he has helped leading Fortune 500 organizations across various industries build a sustainable business strategy embedded in a culture of innovation. Ludwig is also one of the founding authors of the Future-Fit Manifesto, a new strategic approach to collaborative work that empowers organizations to explore new possibilities, seek new frontiers, and boldly create new futures. Ludwig is also a member of the Forbes Technology Council, and he is based in Montreal, Canada. Ludwig and I first met in connection with the Future-Fit Manifesto. Ludwig was leading the development of this manifesto and invited me to be a contributing author to it, an invitation that I accepted and then proceeded to work with Ludwig and others on. The Future-Fit Manifesto builds on the Agile Manifesto that preceded it and was published on the 20th anniversary of the Agile Manifesto. The Future-Fit Manifesto sets forth 4 values for future-fit organizations, namely, collaborative culture over individuals and interactions, innovative systems over working software, discovering opportunities over customer collaboration, and creating alternate futures over responding to change. So in each case, while it values the latter, it values the former much more. This mindset forces organizations to be far more proactive in how they think about and go about shaping the future in front of them. The Future Fit Manifesto also lays out 12 distinct principles for future-fit organizations to operate by, and you'll see many of those principles embedded in Ludwig's talk today. And you can learn more about the Future-Fit Manifesto at futurefitmanifesto.org. Ludwig and I and our respective teams also worked together on the most recent 2022 State of Corporate Innovation Survey, resulting in the report entitled Executive Insights for Innovation Teams, which you can download from the Planbox website at planbox.com. And you'll see new insights from that report today as well. That survey and report focus heavily on the role that both the 2030 UN Sustainable Development Goals and Fourth Industrial Revolution technologies are playing in organizations' innovation efforts today. Indeed, there's a very clear tie-in between the Future Fit Manifesto and these latter 2 things, in that pursuing proactive future-shaping strategies in the context of innovation ecosystems, both things the manifesto requires, is the only truly effective way that organizations today will in fact be able to meet their sustainability goals for the future. And so with that, I want to turn it over to Ludwig, who will be talking about stakeholder innovation in an age of stakeholder capitalism, and specifically how organizations can ramp up their creativity, resilience, and adaptability to develop breakthrough opportunities while achieving their goals for sustainability as informed by the 2030 United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. So join me now, if you will, in welcoming Mr. Ludwig Melik. Ludwig, the floor is all yours.
Thank you very much. Welcome, everyone. I think you should be able to see my screen now. So I appreciate the introduction. And today's webinar, as Anthony said, is called Stakeholder Innovation, Practicing Stakeholder Capitalism in the New Era of Sustainability. There was a really interesting article in the New York Times that I guess I'll start referring to, called Waking Up to 2030, which really ties in, I guess, to what we're going to be discussing. There's been a feeling of acceleration of changes that might have otherwise dragged on for the next decade. So trends that were working slowly started to really speed up. So now we have waken up to normality, especially after the pandemic we experienced, except that it seems like we have time traveled. And I think likewise, companies are realizing that they need to search for a new North Star. It's not just about making more money or increasing market share. So who is a stakeholder? Well, really anyone who is interested or concerned with the business. So that means, of course, a lot of people. So in today's presentation, we'll talk about this new innovation era, what it really means, how you can create a competitive advantage to come out ahead using the Future-Fit strategy. We'll look at what really sustainability is all about. And then, as Anthony mentioned, we did a really interesting State of Corporate Innovation report, got a lot of
recording in progress.
Interesting survey responses, and there was 3 key findings that I think are relevant for our conversation today. So I'll kind of go through those 3 key pieces of insight with you, and then would love to take some of your questions. So not sure how many of you are familiar with the United Nations 2030 agenda. It was formalized a few years ago. More than 180 countries signed on. So it's kind of a big thing. Now, you could maybe say, is this agenda going to be like the Y2K? And for those of you who are old enough, you may remember some of these headlines, predicting the most catastrophic system failure that organizations had to try to avoid. Economists at the time felt like this was going to be, a gigantic investment, unclear if it was going to lead anywhere, potentially a large productivity killer. And it ended up actually being a very positive change for a lot of organizations. It ended up creating a lot of business efficiency and productivity. So as we now kind of look at this sustainability focus, it will be the most radical change to any company's operations, certainly since this Y2K transformation. The 2020s have started pretty rough. It has been mandates, regulations, lockdowns. We're potentially facing a recession. Hopefully, like it happened after the last pandemic, there will be the roaring 20s ahead of us, which was an unprecedented period of growth and prosperity. And potentially this focus on sustainability can help us lead in that way. So let's look at this new innovation era. What are we really kind of talking about? At the turn of the millennium, there was this new thinking that was introduced, and it was called the Agile mindset through this Agile Manifesto that was actually launched in February of 2001. And I think, for the last 20 years, we've been living through that, right? A lot of focus on customer innovation, getting organized around customers, what they need, how do we get things done more quickly in an iterative fashion. And now it appears like that is just not going to cut it as we really get our heads in gear in what it means to be sustainable and serve a larger set of stakeholders. And that's what we're going to be exploring in today's conversation. And we'll tie it back into some of the results we saw in our survey and what we kind of have coined as stakeholder innovation. Kind of being a major shift away from just being obsessed around customers and starting to design and really think about how you innovate around stakeholders, which again are anyone who is interested or concerned with the business. As Anthony mentioned, we launched Future-Fit last year. It's a mindset that represents the next generation of Agile. It is intended to build on it. We will be exploring the 4 values in a little bit more detail today and kind of compare and contrast that in the era of stakeholder innovation to the era of customer innovation. And if you're interested in learning more about those principles, or you want to engage in a conversation with us about those practices and tools, then you should start by taking a look at the website futurefitmanifesto.org. Again, this was a global initiative we did with lots of interesting people, a lot of diverse kind of thinking from all parts of the globe. Definitely the folks at Global Innovation Institute were critical in fantastic feedback. We had others from Forrester, Conference Board, Innovation Leaders, and many other that I'm leaving out that were instrumental in getting this in place. So if we kind of look at what it really means as we make this pivot between customer innovation and stakeholder innovation, I think this is a good conversation where we can start looking at that. So in the era of customer innovation, organizations understood that as important as processes and tools are, getting people together and having those interactions take place was worth gold. Now we kind of need to take that a little one step further, cast a much wider net in terms of the community we want to build. And that's the intention around building a future fit strategy that allows you to have a collaborative culture that really connects, not only everyone in the enterprise, but also people that are maybe outside of the enterprise, which are, kind of what we call the stakeholders, right? This could be your partners as well as your partners, your customers, but it could also be academia or just the public at large. The second area to kind of think about is organizations understanding that comprehensive documentation, as important as it is not going to be as important as getting working solutions in place, which was obviously an important change in the area of customer innovation. But as we have seen, especially with kind of the black swan events that we just experienced, having innovative systems is critical to be able to be resilient, adaptable, creative, no matter what happens. And that's kind of the second key value that Future Fit is recommending. The third one we wanted to look at is understanding that we want to work with customers. We don't want to just engage on endless negotiations. So collaborating with customers and making sure that we are understanding their needs is super important. However, as we are seeing, with the complex nature of the world we're living in, technology innovation, discovering new opportunities is critical, because the answers you're looking for, the business of tomorrow, may not be available with the customers you're necessarily working with today. So that's kind of the third key area. We're going to be exploring these as we go throughout the presentation. And the last one is the understanding in the area of customer innovation that we can't just follow a plan blindly to death. We have to make sure that along the way we embrace change, we factor in risk. And this was obviously something that Agile did really well with the value in terms of responding to change. However, as we have seen over the years, sometimes that just means becoming a fast follower, making incremental changes, and you're not necessarily kind of creating your own destiny, which is really the key fourth value that you see on the Future Fit column, called creating alternate futures. So as Anthony mentioned, as much as there's value on the items on the right, we feel like there's much more value on the items on the left. And that's kind of the transition that organizations need to make, as you will see throughout this presentation, to be able to not only survive, but thrive in the era of stakeholder innovation. So let's maybe take a look at the evolution of sustainability practices in organizations and what they've had to face. And it all kind of started with the corporate social responsibility that organizations had to put together, making sure that they were going to have a social contract between the business and society. Ultimately, the idea here was to make sure that businesses were going to be accountable for the social commitments that they were making, but it was largely done in a qualitative manner. And then eventually that kind of became the environmental, social, and corporate governance reports that we are now seeing a lot of organizations produce known as ESG. And this is more of a rating system that measures the impact of the organization on the planet and society. Now, where kind of this 2030 agenda from the United Nations comes in is that it actually connects to the ESG and introduces these 17 sustainable development goals known as SDGs, and they are kind of further refined through 169 targets and 249 indicators, which really kind of helps define what is the future we want and what are the performance indicators that we need to perform against to be able to achieve those goals. So as you can see, sustainability outlook is a major directional change for a lot of organizations, and ultimately it's going to have a huge impact on how you're going to innovate to be able to achieve and support these goals. So just to make the point of why tackling sustainability goals makes sense, I think these numbers kind of really get that point across. 50% of the revenues of some of the largest organizations in the world are essentially supporting these goals. So there's a lot of money in play already. The other interesting statistic is that 3/4 of consumers say that they will actually discontinue doing business with companies that don't treat the environment, the employees, and the community the way that they should be treated. So, you got to obviously be very mindful of your business practices and the solutions you introduce if it does not also hit the mark in these 3 key areas. The other important statistic, which I think is kind of music to the ears of innovators, is that as tough as these sustainable targets may be, and as much as there's a lot of work ahead, 70% of these targets can be directly supported by technology innovation. So if we think about all of the investments that have been made in digital transformation, there's a lot of opportunities ahead, especially as we think about finally unlocking the value in what has come to be known as the 4th industrial revolution and all of these new technologies that we are seeing organizations try to make sense of and try to integrate into their business. And we'll talk about that a little bit later in the presentation as well. And the last part is that as innovators, you want to get funding, you want to make sure you are able to move things forward. Well, there's a lot of money in sustainability. And right now, I guess based on this report, and the number has surely grown, there's $35 trillion in global sustainable investments that organizations can tap into as they try to think about how they can help achieve these outcomes, and of course, ultimately play a critical role in what we are doing in the next few years ahead of us. So if we look at these 17 goals, if you haven't seen them already, here they are on the screen. At first glance, they're probably going to be, total common sense, right? Number 1, for example, no poverty. Number 5, gender equality. Number 7, clean energy. Number 13, climate action, right? These are maybe some of the more popular ones, but all of these, clearly are areas that make sense. And then number 17 is actually an interesting one too, because it talks about how you cannot do this alone and you need to work with others to get things done. So these 17 goals, as as important and as well defined as they are, what's interesting, and I think this is kind of the pivot that the United Nations made in trying to be a little bit more specific in terms of what are the actual objectives, is that it has actually gone one step further and defined specific targets that you need to think about to be able to achieve that goal. And then in this case, for example, if we take number 7, clean energy, you have 5 specific targets associated to that, which in turn also has specific indicators. And in this case, there are 5 indicators associated to those targets. So this is how you kind of go from 17 goals to 169 targets and then 231 indicators. And there's a wealth of information if you were to read this data and the details on the United Nations website, which I think could be a great way of thinking about how you want to integrate and incorporate those considerations in your next innovation opportunities, and how you want to think about how you can push those forward by integrating these capabilities into the mix. And that's really where the value ultimately lies for innovators, is how can you really combine these goals to seize on greater opportunities. And again, the reality is these are here to stay. They're largely supported in the marketplace, whether you're thinking about goals that support the environment, the society, or the economy. There would be certainly an opportunity to take, for example, a single idea that is going to be interesting to meet the Sustainable Development Goal number 3, good health and well-being, and then think about how you can actually expand that to maybe satisfy other goals, such as number 5, gender equality, or number 10, reducing inequalities, right? So again, there's a lot of opportunities there, and the idea is that by taking the future fit strategy thinking, understanding the role technology innovation can play, organizations can really find themselves kind of in the driver's seat in being able to drive the sustainability outcomes that everyone is looking for. So as Anthony mentioned, we did a pretty interesting survey focused in this area. We looked at what is really working well for the more highly effective innovators, and we're going to share those findings with you. Like I said, there are kind of 3 key areas that I wanted to look at, and I'll try to tie that back into the future fit strategy you can put into place to achieve those outcomes. So the first one, as expected, a lot of organizations largely look within, work with their employees. Some of the better ones at least kind of work across the enterprise and tap into the collective intelligence of all of their employees. However, what we noticed was that the organizations that seem to come out ahead in terms of their success of implementing the ideas that they are getting through their innovation efforts tend to go beyond the primary stakeholders and engage much more closely with the secondary one. And again, this is essentially not only looking at how you can work with your customers, but also how you can work with the academia, with startups, with partners, as well as even the general public. So the more adept innovators seem to get much better outcomes when they cast that wider net, which is essentially, I guess, supporting that future fit value of building a collaborative culture, nurturing an ecosystem, and creating the networks you need to be able to drive those better outcomes. The second area we looked at is how you can essentially really think about sustainability as a new dimension for innovation. And the thing that certainly emerged through our research was that organizations that had an enterprise-wide approach to innovation were 2 to 5 times more ready to embrace the sustainable challenge that lies ahead. So again, clearly, when you have the right thinking across the enterprise, you're much more able to get to where you want to be from an enterprise perspective across these sustainability goals. And more specifically, and I think this definitely supports the efforts for the Global Innovation Institute, is that to be able to have an enterprise-wide approach, clearly you need to have the right people. You need to have the people who have the right expertise, who can help you drive the right results, create the right structural approach for innovation. So we found in our research that organizations who had that level of success were 4 to 5 times more likely to have certified innovation professionals that were available to help drive the organization forward. Similarly, you not only, of course, need a process and you need the right people, but you also need the right system. So likewise, we found that organizations that were using an enterprise-wide innovation system were much more likely to be able to get to where they need to be from a preparation perspective to embrace and take advantage of the opportunities that lie ahead. The next area we looked at was technology innovation in general. And here we noticed that organizations that are trying to make more foundational changes, right? They're not only necessarily thinking about doing incremental changes to the business, but they're really considering more of those transformational opportunities. And they kind of appear here as those H2, H3, meaning Horizon 2 or Horizon 3 activities that are going to help the organization truly make the change it's looking for. And likewise, we found that organizations that had that enterprise-wide approach were much more likely to be satisfied with the investments they were making in those areas. So if you're looking at making technology innovation successful, if you're thinking about really creating that future-shaping technologies in your organization, pivoting towards having an enterprise-wide approach is certainly going to drive better outcomes. Now, when we talk about the fourth industrial revolution, we also want to share some of the technologies that kind of came up on top and bring a little bit better context in what we're talking about. So the organizations that we looked at seem to really be prioritizing these particular technologies: artificial intelligence, Internet of Things, and augmented virtual reality as the key areas of focus to be able to drive the technology innovation that we're looking for. And likewise, when we looked at how prepared they were to embrace that technology innovation challenge, the enterprise-wide approach certainly paid huge dividends in organizations making technology scouting and having these programs really produce their outcomes that they're looking for. I know that this is an area that oftentimes organizations don't necessarily get the results they're looking for. Well, the ones who take that enterprise-wide approach seem to be much more ready to embrace the complex world that we're heading into, especially with these emerging technologies that is still a lot of work to be able to manipulate and be able to bring the right context within the business to leverage them through an enterprise-wide approach. They can certainly see better outcomes to be able to get to where they want to be. So those were kind of the three key areas that we looked at from our survey. Love to take some of your questions and discussions around these things that I think really support being able to make that mind shift and go beyond just saying that I'm going to be agile, but what does that really mean if I'm not being able to embrace the technology innovation and making the future changes that the organization requires to meet the sustainability challenges that lie ahead. And certainly taking that enterprise-wide approach is helping organizations get there. Now, if you're looking for some simple ways to get started, you can certainly contact us if you want to learn more. We've already started kind of experimenting on this with the help of our clients as well. So these are just some examples of various challenges you can think about formulating in your organization that could then tie back into potentially finding interesting innovation opportunities that drive the various outcomes you would probably be looking for to support these 17 goals that I laid out, which will ultimately be, of course, information we often see find itself into those ESG reports that organizations are producing. So I guess in closing, I'll leave you with this really nice quote that I think makes the point. It's from François-Henri Pinault. Sustainable development is a foundational break that is going to reshuffle the entire deck. There are companies today that are going to dominate the future simply because they understand that. So I guess with that, Anthony, I'll pass it back to you and see if there are any questions.
Thank you so much, Ludwig. Very good. Excellent, excellent discussion. stemming out of Future-Fit and the state of corporate innovation and so forth. So at this point, we will transition and address any number of questions that any of you have. So if you have questions, you can either enter them in the chat window and Ludwig and I can address them, or if you'd rather unmute yourself and ask a question directly of Ludwig, feel free to do so. So Ludwig, we'll start with the first question in the chat window. We have one there from Elto von Stockmann, and he wants to know, what exactly do you mean by enterprise-wide approach?
Okay, so I think that generally, if you think about agile, and it has kind of try to address some of the shortcomings around this thinking over time, but it has been most of it has been more of a team-based thinking, rather than being more of a organizational and an enterprise-wide initiative. So it's really around having a mindset that cascades from essentially from the top down, and of course from the bottom up, right? So if you think about your objective and key results, your OKRs, and how you're kind of setting them up at the toppest level of the company, and then cascading down those realities into what each team needs to achieve. So I think that's kind of when we think about an enterprise-wide approach, is how does the organization really kind of formulate those goals and make sure that the right approaches are put in place so that everyone is working together as a single unit, and not necessarily doing things individually without understanding the impact that it may have on others.
I think that's important too, because a lot of organizations, they have different business units, they have different localized optimizations in their business unit, and one business unit is taking this approach or philosophy, and another business unit is taking that one, and there's not a coherent approach across the entire organization, which means it really misses the opportunity to have the level of impact it really should organizationally. So trying to really, I think, integrate across the entire enterprise the approach is where the organization is going to realize the greatest impact. Ludwig, the next question we have is from Eric Lionford, and he wants to know, for innovation management systems, do you mean just the process or process plus the software?
I think when you think about a system, you obviously want to have both. I think kind of like what we saw with the results we got, you want to have the right innovation professionals, you want to have a system that supports them. We've obviously seen other international bodies like the ISO 56000 that is trying to create a system for innovation. And like with everything else, if you have a great approach, but you don't have a software, you can probably try to get it done, but it will be a little bit more difficult to create a sustainable practice. So software, I think, just makes the life a little bit easier, streamlines the process, brings a little bit more transparency. But first and foremost, you obviously need to make sure you actually know what you're doing and how you want to do it. And then the software will come in and help support it.
Yeah, and I think the size and complexity of the organization plays a role there too. In a really small company, you could probably get away with a manual approach, but as you grow into a larger organization, it almost becomes impossible to do without some sort of software platform to facilitate the process. So in any mid-sized to large organization, having the software really significantly facilitates the system and all of the tasks and things that different people have to do. Because if you're doing innovation management properly, you actually have a lot of different players playing different roles and involved in different ways, and having some of the software tools as a platform to support that plays a big role in a larger organization for certain. So, Ludwig, our next question comes from Carlos Oliveira, and he wants to know, what are the major and recurrent mistakes that companies make when addressing innovation challenges? That's his first question.
Sure. So I think the first thing we've seen is really making sure you actually have the efforts being put on the right problem. I think and we obviously we're not the only ones to say this. I think people who understand innovation agree that identifying the right problem that is really worth solving is the most important thing. We can tend to find ourselves always trying to solve the easier problems rather than understanding what are the more interesting opportunities that could potentially become those breakthrough innovations that the organization would love to get its hands on. So I think, finding that grand challenge would certainly be first and foremost an area that organizations probably don't spend enough time reflecting, and they kind of start innovating around a particular area a little bit more quickly than they should. The second part of that answer would be probably what we've seen time and time again is articulating the right statement of what is this challenge really about makes all the difference in helping solve it correctly. Making sure you also understand that you may not get the right answer right away. So breaking down that challenge in a logical approach so that you start by getting to step one and then maybe launch a subsequent challenge to be able to better get to the answer that you're looking for. So I think, this approach of defining your challenge, understanding what is it you really want to take on in each step of the way is also something that maybe gets lost in the shuffle and the excitement of wanting to get going. And that thought process of maybe slowing things down and being a little bit more thoughtful could certainly pay a lot of dividends in the outcomes that you're going to achieve from these discussions that you have as innovators.
I'd also add that, I think what goes a long way is to really take the time to sit down and work through a well-defined innovation strategy. And I work with a lot of organizations on their innovation strategies, and we usually define what are the specific domains that they want to focus on, and what is their vision for that domain, what's the goals, and what are the specific challenges they want to address. And, this all becomes a part of the strategy because the strategy, it orients us and points us in the right direction. It defines those challenges. So, really working off a playbook of a strategy of what areas we're going to tackle, what domains, how we're going to pursue them, what we want to do, and getting everyone in the organization aligned to that really goes a long ways, I believe. Carlos also mentioned the person at the top who contacted you to assist with innovation is actually the major blockage to innovation in the company. So you have a paradox there. Ludwig, any advice for people struggling with that paradox of blockage and corporate antibodies?
Sure. I wish there was easy answers to all of this stuff, right? Clearly we have a lot of hard work in our hands. I think definitely one of the things that we are hoping came across in this presentation is you want to definitely try to understand what are the big things that an organization has to care about. And sustainability right now is at the top, if not near the top of that list. So I think if you want to get that person's attention and you want them to not only embrace, but very with high level of motivation support what you're doing, then definitely try to see to what extent you can tie your efforts into the sustainability goals that has a lot of these executives' attention these days, and that could certainly help pave the way to getting the support you're looking for.
Yeah, I think you're right. And then in addition to that, just figure out what really matters to that person and how do I act on, what really matters to them. And so try to, motivate them from behind, if you will, so to speak. Let's move on to the next question. Yelto wants to know, in terms of training, does this mean enterprise-wide approach also to upskill all employees on sustainable development goals and technologies like AI and I2VR? I mean, in other words, do we need to upskill the entire organization, or is it adequate just to address certain pockets, if you will, I guess?
I don't know if you want to take that one first.
Well, my answer would be it's important to upskill everyone to a certain level. I mean, I guess what you'd call awareness training. I think it's good to have the entire organization get some level of awareness training so they understand what the sustainable development goals are and what their purpose is and how organizations pursue them. They understand what some of the fourth industrial revolution technologies are and what their implications are to the organization, at least from an awareness standpoint. And then you have other individuals who actually have to go out and do work in these areas. And those individuals you're going to have to dive much deeper on their level of knowledge and skill and expertise. So those type of people, you have to raise their capability level far higher than the general population of the organization. That's my sense.
Exactly. I think,
add anything?
Yeah, exactly. I think kind of like, you said, I think generally because of also these things almost, to some extent after this major shock to the system have become much more of a concern and very quickly, I think there's this, sensitivity campaign that organizations should be contemplating in making sure that they understand the nature of a very fast changing world that we are living in today, and how does that connect to technology considerations, new technologies that we need to start integrating, and why, and how does this again also integrate to a changing world and requirements we have from a much larger set of stakeholders that are not just our customers, and how important that is in what we're trying to achieve. And of course, without these two things, then people will not be doing their work in the right context.
Right. And to your point, Ludwig, the fact that these things are changing very quickly and evolving, the technologies in particular, I think this awareness training is something you have to repeat every couple of years. And it's like, okay, since we last did this 2 years ago, here's what has changed. And here's new applications, new uses, new use cases, evolution of the technology. And so you have to, I think, repeat this awareness every couple of years or so, just to keep people in your organization abreast of the state of practice and so forth. Let's move to the next question. So Ibrahim Sharani asked the question, as your innovation is leading to sustainability, what are the roles of innovative work behavior in this era or subject? So innovative work behaviors, where do the work behaviors fit in?
I don't know if I understand the question correctly. Where my mind went when I read that is that if you think about organizations, they love to create single roles, right? You have to have someone in charge of innovation, and you have someone in charge of strategy, and someone is in charge of diversity, and of course, there's someone in charge of sustainability. In reality, all these people need to work together for things to get done, and that cooperation, unfortunately, is not always there as it should be. Much like HR has to also have an important seat at the table, so that the employees' evaluation and performance is accounted for. So I think this is again a very complex set of considerations that an organization has in terms of making sure that you have the right behavior. Ultimately, you have these folks that are tasked with being the experts or the owners of these work behaviors at the highest level, and it's important to make sure that those discussions that are taking place around your innovation efforts factor in these folks as their expertise is needed, so that over time, of course, people understand how diversity, for example, gets factored in to this discussion, so you don't end up with silly innovations. What was that story of a soap that a person uses and it turns a black person white? Just awful things that you see in an ad, and you're like, how did that happen? Because the right people were not involved in the conversations that had to take place to avoid these kinds of major disasters, as an extreme example. But the thought process is to make sure that you're kind of upskilling and getting the people involved with the right expertise, so that people are being sensitized over time to what they need to factor into their innovations.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I think, organizations still tend to be relatively siloed, and as you were saying, have different individuals responsible for different areas. But to the extent that we can, in our organization, employ bottom-up innovation or participatory innovation and get everyone involved, and then we can issue very specific challenges relating to areas. And for example, we can issue specific challenges looking for opportunities or solutions relating to sustainability, and we can lay that challenge out to the entire organization. So in terms of the work behaviors, I think there's opportunities here inside any organization to really cultivate a lot more creativity and imagination and searching for new answers across the organization. It doesn't need to be limited to certain quote-unquote experts, but a lot of times people, especially on the front lines of an organization, will see opportunities that others don't. So I think there's an opportunity to really promote that type of work behavior in the context of looking for solutions for sustainability and any other solutions as well. So let's go to the next question. It's from Adil Faisal, and he wants to know, do you find enterprises open to pursuing or managing innovation in-house or more through outside agencies and partners and incubators?
So I think definitely when we look at least the organizations we work with, and whether it's, use a couple of names, for example, with Novartis and Hollister, which was a medical devices company, you can see that, co-creation, working with others, essentially starting to not only innovate inside out, but outside in, became much more of a required skill that organizations started to embrace. We saw a lot of organizations started to experiment with the topic. Of course, the first question always is, how do we protect our intellectual property? How do we make sure we're doing this the right way? And frankly, there are very good answers to all of these concerns. If you work with the right experts, they can definitely guide you through the process if you need help. I think ultimately, there are very expected walls that may come up, but they can very easily be taken down if you're having the right conversation. And clearly, again, tying this back to the sustainable goals we just looked at, having an understanding that you cannot do this alone and you need to work others to get it done. And that was essentially number 17, partnership for the goals, is something that is becoming much more prevalent in how organizations are engaging in open innovation in some some way or another. Of course, the better ones are literally creating an external presence that is very visible and transparent, and you're not going to get there overnight, but you can start taking incremental steps to get there.
Excellent. And Ibrahim would like to know, as you're an expert in innovation management, which type of leadership style do you believe will best drive innovation and sustainability? So leadership style.
So feel free to jump in also, Anthony, on this one if you want to start.
Well, to me, there's actually multiple facets to that leadership style. Number one, it takes a leader who understands the big picture of what's happening in the world, who understands where future trends are going, what role sustainable development goals play, what role fourth industrial revolution technologies play. They can really see the big picture and integrate that, and they have a vision for where they want this organization and its value propositions to go in the future. And then in terms of really engaging the organization in that process, I think they want to cast a vision. They want to make sure the organization has a real sense of purpose. And our friends at Exponential, they talk about massively compelling purpose, right? Something about changing the world, in effect. And so if a leader can ensure that his organization understands their purpose in the context of the whole world and of all these things, and that they're excited about that purpose, and they have a vision that has been cast around that purpose, and everything they do from innovation ties back to that purpose and achieving that purpose and the strategies for realizing that vision and that purpose, then I think inherently, it attracts the type of people who want to be a part of that. And those type of people really become passionate about the purpose of the organization and passionate about helping it achieve its aims around sustainability and other areas. And to me, no level of management can ever substitute for that type of leadership and really driving passion around a purpose that's tied to these other things. So that's my perspective. Feel free to add on to that if you'd like, Ludwig.
Sure. I think, just to maybe answer the question a little bit differently, if you ask me, when we work with organizations, which organizations tend to do better and get better results, it ends up being with, if there's a strategy person that is, truly, has the right set of responsibilities, and they are the person who is essentially defining the innovation mandate. Because again, the word innovation can mean so much or so little, right? Depending on what the organization defines it to be. So if there's a person that has a strategy role that is really looking at changing the enterprise and making it fit for the future and really driving more transformational innovation, sustainability, and all of the things we kind of talked about in this conversation today, getting the technology innovation that the organization is looking for, that tends to be the winning formula from what we see as an organization that provides a software solution and a platform to enable that thought process to make it successful. Otherwise, innovation could end up being something that is largely departmental, depending on the heroics of a few, or for a very specific use case, and it ends up, of course, still creating value, but it could potentially do much more, except it's not given the right context and the right environment to be able to get there.
I totally agree with that, because all good corporate innovation programs, they have a senior executive sponsor who sponsors the program and who really sets the tone for the innovation agenda, helps own and drive much of the innovation strategy, and really, like you said, integrates that across the organization. So you do need that sponsor in that role, really driving the program coherently and cohesively across the organization. And that's a key element of having an innovation program. So a couple other questions here real quick, Ludwig. One of the things we talked about a lot in the context of Future-Fit was innovation ecosystems and the need for these ecosystems. So I'd like to hear what your thoughts about how we create a really powerful ecosystem, and maybe what hurdles we encounter in that process of trying to create an ecosystem.
Sure. So I think, definitely this is, in our mind, absolutely an excellent way for an organization to create a sustainable competitive advantage, right? If you think about, a few years back, it was all around how do we create efficiencies, and Six Sigma and all these kind of business practices support organizations in doing that. But, you do that time and time and time again, at some point, there's just so much you can do. And it's essentially something that I think has kind of played itself out in most part for many companies. When we think about building an ecosystem, it's really, again, creating connections within the enterprise, and of course that's also super important. And I'm talking about across the enterprise, so that you have a centralized system of intelligence that allows you to avoid duplication of work, avoid going down the same rabbit hole inside the company, but also there's a clear way for you to communicate and work with on an ongoing basis with the outside world. So, this could be, of course, whether you want to think of it as workspaces or meetings that you're trying to have, so that you have a logical way to consistently bring in outside perspectives that helps nurture the innovation thinking. Of course, there's a lot of information that also just lies out in the World Wide Web. So there's a lot of interesting techniques you can also leverage through AI to be able to mine for those insights and bring that information in. Of course, the challenge here for many companies is to connect all of these kind of moving pieces and all these data points to concrete areas of focus. So I think that's kind of the work that we try to do with our clients, and I'm sure the innovation professionals you work with would help you with, in terms of trying to make sense how you can take advantage and of this information, and ultimately create the right motivations. And this is, through whatever gamification system you can put in place that allow you to, recognize, reward, and make sure that those interactions are something that are going to kind of cement themselves over time, and you can build on it rather than continually trying to replace it.
Very good. And I think the key important point there is it takes time. I mean, it's not something you necessarily turn on overnight, but it does take time and intentionality to develop a really powerful innovation ecosystem and the different parties you're going to work with. I think it also requires rethinking some of our business models and how we can deliver value to our markets better through more of an ecosystem-oriented business model. And again, you can conceive ideas for that, but then actually executing it takes time to really develop the right partners for that ecosystem and figure out how that ecosystem actually works and how the moving pieces work. So all of that's correct. Great. So Ludwig, I want to thank you very much. We have a lot of people who have expressed their appreciation for your insights and your time and for this session. So I also want to express my appreciation to you for being our guest today. I want to mention to everyone that I put a link in the chat window here. So if you're interested in getting a copy of this report, Executive Insights for Innovation Teams, which came out of the 2022 State of Corporate Innovation Survey, the link is there in the chat window. You can simply click that, and it will take you to the web to access that report. So with that, I will say thank you, everyone, and I will make that a wrap for today. Thank you so much, Ludwig. Everyone, have a wonderful rest of your day, and we'll see you at our next webinar. Take care.
Thank you.